Hi, second grade. Welcome back to story time. Miss W is going to be reading one of her favorite authors of all time, the fantastic Master Shakespeare. I love Shakespeare and I want to share that with you. I've read this story every year to my students, and I didn't want to let us staying home stop me from reading it to you. This story is one of Shakespeare's most famous tragedies. Do you know what a tragedy is? Shakespeare wrote 3 different types of plays, and one of them was a history, comedy, comedies, and the other one was tragedy. So a tragedy, somebody always dies. They just do. That's what makes it a tragedy. So I don't want you to be caught off guard if you don't know this story. Okay? This story is called, this play, Romeo and Juliet. This is adapted by Anna Claiborne and illustrated by Jana Costa. Here's the characters that you need to remember. That way you don't get lost in Romeo and Juliet. Right here we have old Montague. He is the head of the Montague family, and he adores his son, Romeo. His name's Romeo Montague. This guy, his name is Count Paris. He's a nobleman and he's engaged to Juliet. They're supposed to get married. Now, right here, we have Prince Aeschylus. He's over here. He's ruler of Verona, which is where they live. And he's annoyed with the constant quarrels between the local families. Romeo Montague. Here's Romeo. He's heir to the Montague family, and he falls in love with Juliet at first sight. Right here, we have Mercutio, and he's a good friend of Romeo and Benvolio. He's flamboyant and quick-witted. He's very smart and quick on his feet. Over here, this is Benvolio. This is Romeo's cousin, and he's friends with Mercutio and Romeo. But he's also a peacemaker. He doesn't like the fighting. We have Friar Lawrence. He's an old monk, and he tries to help Romeo and Juliet. This is Lady Capulet, Juliet's mother, and she wants her to marry Count Paris, this guy over here. This is Friar John. He's a friend to Friar Lawrence. Right down here, we have old Capulet. This is the head of the Capulet family, and he's a very strict father. Tybalt. Tybalt is Juliet's cousin, and he's hot-headed. What is hot-headed? Loses his temper very quickly. And he's argumentative. Likes to argue. Right over here, we have Juliet's nurse, and she's cared for Juliet since she was a little baby. She's like her babysitter, but she stays with her the whole time. Way over here is Juliet, and Juliet Capulet, and she was 13 when the story begins. Chapter 1, Capulets and Montagues. Excuse me. It was a warm summer's afternoon in the pretty town of Verona. People were busy shopping and chatting in the sunshine when suddenly 2 gangs of young men tore across the market square, fighting, kicking, and rolling in the dust. The townspeople ran for cover. "Have at thee, coward!" The gangs belonged to 2 of Verona's richest families, the Capulets and the Montagues. The families were sworn enemies, and they were always fighting. In minutes, Verona's ruler, Prince Aeschylus, arrived with his soldiers to break up the fight. The prince was furious. "I've had enough of this feud," he raged. "It's got to stop. From now on, anyone caught fighting will be put to death." Old Montague, the head of the Montague family, hurried into the market square searching for his son Romeo, but he only found Benvolio, Romeo's cousin. "Don't worry, uncle," said Benvolio. "Romeo wasn't fighting. He's too sensible." Soon after that, Romeo himself wandered by. Benvolio was telling him what had happened, when someone spoke behind them. "Have you heard? Old Capulet is holding a masked ball tonight." "Did you hear that, Romeo?" whispered Benvolio. "A party at the Capulets' house. Let's go. If we wear disguises, no one will guess who we are." Excited, the two young Montagues went to find their friend Mercutio to invite him along. Falling in love. At the Capulets' mansion, the place was buzzing with excitement. Servants raced around, laying the tables and lighting candles, putting the finishing touches to the party. Upstairs, Juliet Capulet's nurse was helping her dress when Juliet's mother came in. "Now, Juliet," she said, "a man named Count Paris is coming tonight. I hope you like him. Your father and I want you to marry him." "Oh, Juliet, sweetheart," squealed her nurse. "You're to be married? How exciting!" Juliet was horrified. She was only 13. She wasn't ready to get married. And what if she didn't like Count Paris? But there was no time to argue. The party was about to start. Straightening her dress, Juliet went down the grand marble staircase to the banqueting hall. A little later, 3 surprise guests arrived. Benvolio and Mercutio wanted to dance, but Romeo stood still. He had spotted a beautiful girl in a pink and cream dress, and he couldn't take his eyes off of her. "Did my heart love till now, forswear its sight? For I never saw true beauty till this night." Juliet's cousin Tybalt recognized the 3 friends and went straight to old Capulet. "Uncle, there are Montagues here," he declared. "Let's kick them out." "No, Tybalt," said his uncle. "Remember the prince's warning. No fighting." Romeo saw the girl leave the hall and followed. Shyly, he went up to her. "I don't know who you are," he said, "but I've fallen in love with you, and you're beautiful." And he kissed her. Juliet had left the hall to escape from Count Paris. She didn't like Paris at all. But when Romeo kissed her, she felt her heart fluttering. She fell in love with him at once. "Who are you?" Juliet murmured. "He's Romeo Montague," snapped Juliet's nurse, who had come to look for her. "And old Capulet would have a fit if he saw his daughter with a Montague. Come on," she urged, taking Juliet away. "Count Paris wants to dance with you." Romeo groaned. "She's a Capulet? Oh, what am I going to do?" When the party ended, Romeo sneaked outside and hid in the Capulets' garden. As the moon rose, he saw Juliet step onto a balcony. "Oh, Romeo," she sighed, "it's you I love. If only you weren't a Montague." Here's what Shakespeare said. "But soft, what light Through yonder window breaks, it is the east, and Juliet is the sun. O Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? Juliet, Romeo called to her, I'm here in the garden, and I love you. You do? Said Juliet. With all my heart, Romeo replied. I'd marry you if I could. But my parents are going to make me marry Count Paris, Juliet wailed. She frowned. Our only hope is to get married in secret, she said at last. Then we will, said Romeo. I'll ask my nurse to help us, Juliet decided. Send me a message tomorrow. I will, Romeo promised. But now I'd better go. Good night, Juliet. Parting is such sweet sorrow. A secret wedding. The next morning, Romeo went to visit Friar Lawrence. The friar was a wise monk who made medicines and helped people with their problems. What can I do for you, Romeo? Friar Lawrence asked. I'm in love with Juliet Capulet, Romeo explained. I know our parents won't like it, but we really want to get married. Then I'll help you, the friar said kindly. When your parents find out you're married, it might help stop the fighting. If you both come to my house this afternoon, I'll marry you in secret. Romeo was delighted. He ran to the market square to find Juliet's nurse and give her the message. The nurse rushed off to tell Juliet what Romeo had said. She hated to see her beloved Juliet unhappy. Hie you hence to Friar Lawrence's cell. There stays a husband to make you a wife. Juliet couldn't stop smiling. I'll tell my parents I'm going to see the friar about my wedding to Count Paris, she decided. As the clock struck 2, Juliet arrived at Friar Lawrence's house. Romeo was waiting for her, and the friar performed the secret wedding at once. Romeo and Juliet were married, but Juliet's parents were expecting her back, and she had to go straight home. So Romeo went to look for Benvolio and Mercutio. He found them in the market square, arguing with Tybalt Capulet. What's the problem? Romeo asked. You Montagues are the problem, snarled Tybalt, turning to Romeo. You sneaked into our party, and I'm going to make you pay. I challenge you to a duel. I refuse, Romeo replied. You know the prince said no fighting. You're afraid to fight, Tybalt taunted him. Don't speak to my friend like that, said Mercutio. Oh, so you want to fight instead, do you? Tybalt shouted. Drawing his sword, Mercutio drew his too, and they started fighting. Stop it, yelled Benvolio. He and Romeo frantically tried to pull the pair apart. They were too late. Tybalt stabbed Mercutio, who slumped to the ground, dead. Romeo was so upset. He grabbed Mercutio's sword. Without thinking, he ran at Tybalt and stabbed him too. Benvolio stared in horror as Tybalt sank to the ground. Romeo, what have you done? He gasped. Quick, before the prince comes. Romeo dropped the sword and ran for his life. Escape to Mantua. When Prince Aeschylus arrived, Benvolio told him about the fight. The prince was angry, but he could see that Tybalt was mostly to blame. Romeo shall not die, he said. I'll banish him instead. Being banished meant Romeo would have to leave Verona and never come back. It was better than being put to death, but not much. Gossip spread fast in Verona, and the nurse soon heard what had happened. With tears in her eyes, she went to tell Juliet. Juliet was heartbroken. "Cousin Tybalt is dead," she sobbed, "and I'll never see my Romeo again." "Don't cry," begged the nurse. "I'll bring Romeo to see you before he leaves. He's hiding at the friar's house." "Yes, please find him," Juliet said, wiping her eyes. "Ask him to come and say goodbye." The nurse went straight to the friar's house. Romeo looked as if he'd been crying too. "Romeo, you should be grateful," said Friar Lawrence. "The prince has spared your life." "But I am banished," Romeo said, "and I want to be with Juliet. Heaven is here where Juliet lives." "Go and see her tonight," said Friar Lawrence. "But make sure you leave Verona by dawn. Head for the city of Mantua. After a while, I'll talk to the prince. I'll ask him to forgive you and let you come home." The nurse smiled at Romeo. "I'll tell Juliet you're on your way." That night, Romeo went again to the Capulets' garden and climbed the ivy to Juliet's balcony. But before dawn, he had to leave. "It's not day yet," Juliet pleaded. "It was the nightingale you heard and not the lark." Romeo sighed. "I must go," he said. "If I stay here, I'll die." Giving his new wife one last kiss, he climbed down the balcony, sped from the garden, set off for Mantua. All that morning Juliet cried and cried. Her nurse tried to comfort her, but she couldn't stop. Suddenly, her mother and father swept in. "Why, how now, Juliet?" "Poor Juliet," said her mother, going over to her. "You're still upset about Tybalt. But this will cheer you up. You're to marry Count Paris. The wedding's on Thursday." "Thursday?" gasped Juliet. It was so soon. "But I don't want to marry Count Paris. Please don't make me." Her father scowled. "I won't marry him," Juliet shouted. "No, no, no." "What do you mean, no?" said her father, angrily. "You'll marry Count Paris on Thursday, and that's that." And her parents left. "But I'm already married," wept Juliet. "What am I going to do?" "Well, you can tell your parents about Romeo," said her nurse. The nurse bustled away, and Juliet realized only one person could help her. "I must go and see Friar Lawrence," she thought. The magic potion. Friar Lawrence was planting herbs in his garden when Juliet arrived. "Oh, Friar, please help me," she begged. "My father says I have to marry Count Paris on Thursday." "But you can't," said the friar. "You have to help me." Juliet was desperate. "I'd rather die than marry Count Paris. Is there anything you can do?" The friar thought for a while. "Well," he said finally, "there's one thing that might work. I'll give you a magic herbal potion," the friar said. "When you drink it, you'll go into a coma. Your body will be cold and it will look as if you're dead. But really, you'll just be in a very deep sleep, which will last for 2 days. Drink the potion tonight. In the morning, your parents will find you and think you're dead. They'll put your body in the Capulet family tomb while they arrange your funeral." Then what? asked Juliet. I'll send a messenger to Mantua to tell Romeo the plan, the friar went on. 2 nights from now you'll wake up. Romeo can come to Verona to rescue you, and you can run away together. I'll do it, said Juliet bravely. She held the bottle in a trembling hand. Thank you, Friar Lawrence. Clutching the potion tightly, she turned and ran home. Back at the Capulet mansion, Juliet went to talk to her parents. I'm sorry I was rude to you, she said sweetly. I was upset about Tybalt. Of course I'll marry Count Paris on Thursday. Good girl, said her mother. I am glad. That night, Juliet sat on her bed. Carefully she uncorked the bottle Friar Lawrence had given her and drank every last drop of the bitter potion. A few moments later, she fell into a deep, deep sleep. Romeo returns. It was just as the friar had promised. The next morning, Juliet's nurse found her cold body lying on the bed and screamed, She's dead! Juliet's dead! There'll be no wedding for my daughter, said old Capulet, trying to hold back his tears. Instead, we must prepare for a funeral. Carry her body to the family tomb. Is she really? Do you remember? She drank the potion. Meanwhile, Friar Lawrence wrote a letter to Romeo explaining everything. He sealed up the letter and gave it to his friend Friar John to deliver. This letter must reach Romeo tomorrow. Hurry to Mantua. But the news spread fast. Soon, people from miles around had heard about Juliet's death. In Mantua, a servant told Romeo that Capulet's daughter had died. I'll go back to Verona and find Juliet in the tomb, Romeo sobbed. Then I'll lie beside her and drink poison so I die too. That way we can be together. Romeo went to find an apothecary. I need the strongest poison you have, he said. You can't buy poison in Mantua. It's against the law, the man told him. But Romeo saw he was poor and offered him 40 gold coins. The apothecary quickly handed over a tiny bottle. Put this in any liquid thing you will and drink it. Romeo put the poison in his bag and headed for Verona as fast as his horse could carry him. By the time Friar John arrived in Mantua, Romeo had already left. So the friar set off back to Verona without delivering the letter. Late that night, Romeo arrived in Verona. He crept to the Capulet's house and found the entrance to the tomb. But someone else was already there, Count Paris. What are you doing here, Montague? Paris demanded. Juliet is dead because of you. You killed her cousin Tybalt, and she died of grief. That's not true, Romeo cried. I loved her more than you did. You're trespassing, snapped the Count, drawing his dagger. Get out! He lunged at Romeo. Romeo drew his dagger, and he fought back. Count Paris gasped and fell to his knees, dying. I am slain. Romeo stepped over the body and went to find Juliet. She was lying inside, as cold as the stone beneath her, but as beautiful as ever. Romeo took her hand and wept as he kissed her cheek. Oh, dear Juliet, why art thou yet so fair? Back at Friar Lawrence's house, Friar John had returned. "I went to Mantua, but I couldn't deliver the message," he announced. "Romeo wasn't there." Friar Lawrence felt sick. "But Juliet will wake up alone in the tomb," he said. "I must rescue her." And he rushed from his house, heading for the Capulet tomb. In the tomb, Romeo took out his bottle of poison. He drank it all, lay down beside Juliet, and kissed her one last time. "O true apothecary, thy drugs are quick. Thus, with a kiss, I die." In a few moments, Romeo lay still. Not long after that, Juliet awoke. She rubbed her eyes and sat up. "Where am I?" she wondered. Then she remembered the magic potion and Friar Lawrence's plan. "Romeo?" she called. "Oh no," she cried. As she saw his still body, she noticed the poison bottle in his hand and shook his shoulders. He didn't stir. Juliet realized what he'd done. "Oh, Romeo," she sobbed, "I can't live without you. I'll kiss your lips and poison myself too." Just then she heard a noise. Someone was coming. "Yea, noise? Then I'll be brief. Oh, happy dagger!" Juliet grabbed Romeo's dagger. Before anyone could arrive to stop her, she plunged it into her heart and collapsed on top of Romeo. Friar Lawrence burst into the tomb, followed by soldiers and servants. They were too late. Romeo and Juliet were dead. The friar summoned the Capulets, the Montagues, and Prince Aeschylus and told them the whole story. The prince turned to the two families. "See what your hatred has done," he said. "Romeo and Juliet have paid the price for your feud." Old Capulet and old Montague agreed to bury Romeo and Juliet side by side. Wiping away their tears, they promised that their families would never fight again. Here's what Shakespeare said: "For never was a story of more woe than this of Juliet and her Romeo."